On an evening where Scotland could qualify for the World Cup for the first time in my lifetime, by the way, I still need to sit here and talk to you about Celtic, because even though there's a huge night for Scottish football fans over the country, Celtic are still waiting on their new manager. And after rumours started floating last night that a deal had collapsed and that Wilfried Nancy wouldn't be the new Celtic boss, we had to get some reassurances today that that wasn't the case, and it seems that we got those reassurances. So we're going to talk about that, we're going to talk about everything else, and we'll even talk slightly about the Scotland game later on in the video. So bear with me and let's do that. Welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. Are we all feeling a wee bit nervous for the Denmark game this evening? The nerves rattling through us a wee bit. For somebody who this time last year felt very disenfranchised from the national team, I'm back on the bandwagon for at least this evening, and then afterwards I'll be back to saying Steve Clark out and all the rest of it. Anyway, we have to talk about Celtic. We have a lot to talk about. Could it be a huge week for the club where we appoint our next permanent manager? That's the question on everyone's minds right now. And after a club update last night which suggested that Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney will still be in charge for the weekend, everything was thrown into question. But we have some reassurances to go over. We have some news coming out from the homeland of potential new Celtic manager Wilfried Nancy. And we've just got a lot to cover, so let's do that. So this is the club statement which came out last night, a first team update that was issued around 5 PM yesterday to basically update Celtic fans on the situation right now, and of course what it means heading into the weekend as we play St Mirren. Now, I covered this statement in great depth yesterday on a live stream, so I don't want to sound like a broken record, and I don't want to repeat myself from everything I've already said about this statement, but in case you missed it, or in case you weren't there, I'll quickly go over it again, and I'll quickly give you what it essentially means. Celtic have confirmed that Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney will continue to be interim manager or interim managers right now until the process is complete of appointing a permanent manager. And they'll update supporters as soon as possible. Now, this statement raised a big debacle online, and rumours started circulating that a deal had fallen through with the potential next boss, Wilfried Nancy, who at the weekend, of course, was the front runner to be the Celtic manager, and apparently Dermot Desmond had wanted him from the get-go, and he was the number one choice, and it was only a matter of time before he was appointed. So when this statement was released, people started losing the rag, people started reading between the lines, looking for subtext, to assume that it meant that wasn't the guy anymore and that Celtic were forced to look in another direction. I can't help but reiterate that that was never the case from this at all. This was simply just communication from the club heading into a new week to tell us what the situation was. The fact that it was Monday evening and we hadn't had an announcement that Wilfried Nancy was, or Nancy, whatever you'd want to call him at this point, wasn't the new Celtic manager, I think was always going to raise some questions, and some people were going to get a little bit anxious about that. So I think the fact that it hit 5 o'clock and we didn't have an announcement about a new manager, Celtic decided, right, we've got to give them some communication, especially with a game coming up at the weekend, and they gave us this. But there wasn't need for the reaction, I think, that followed, especially online with the rumours circulating a deal fell through. This wasn't like the Eddie Howe statement back in 2021. And if you remember rightly, that was a statement which basically said, we wanted Eddie Howe, we essentially had Eddie Howe, and Eddie Howe has backed out at the last minute. He will not be Celtic manager. And I think a lot of people have seen this statement, tried to line it up with the statement that we saw in 2021 in relation to Eddie Howe, and said it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's not at all. The process of appointing Brother Wilfried as the new manager is going to take time. There is compensation fees to pay. There is negotiations with the man himself and his agents. There is a process of moving from North America to Scotland. There is a lot that will hold up this deal, even if it's only by a couple of days. And that needs some patience. Celtic were simply giving communication. And a lot of people were unhappy about the statement, and I get that. A lot of people saying it's a shambles from Celtic. It's a shambles the way we're handling things. It's another, it's Celtic lowballing Wilfried Nancy, and this is just typical of our board. And even though I agree that the way that we handle things is never good, like we seem to be very different from other clubs, I did say at the start of this process, Celtic need to be clear with their communication with supporters. And to be fair to them, and I don't want to give the board any credit because I want rid of them, they gave us communication here. And they gave us probably all the communication they could for now, without breaking too many details or without jumping the gun. They've given us the information that we need going into this weekend. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. People suggesting it's because we're lowballing the new manager. There is nowhere suggesting that's the case. There's nowhere suggesting that Celtic have lowballed anybody. So a lot of the things you might be hearing, it's hearsay. It's rumour. It could be nonsense. Basically, Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney look set to be managing going into the weekend, and Wilfried Nancy will still become the Celtic manager. That's essentially it. And there's no other lines to read between as of right now. If you want to jump ahead and get in ahead of people in case something does collapse so you can act like you're in the know, cool, do that. But there is nothing out there right now to suggest that the deal is done. In fact, if anything, the deal has collapsed. If anything, now we have information coming from France that the deal is almost done. Because these were the headlines coming out of France this morning. This was wrote about 9 AM by L'Equipe, who are, of course, one of the biggest sport publications in Europe, and of course the biggest in France, the homeland of Wilfried Nancy. He is close to joining Celtic to succeed Brendan Rodgers. Wilfried Nancy is in advanced negotiations with Celtic to replace Brendan Rodgers, and we need to reach an agreement with Columbus Crew to buy out the final year of his contract. So L'Equipe go on to say that in search of the replacement for Brendan Rodgers, they've stepped up their pursuit of Wilfried Nancy, and the French coach of Columbus Crew could join Celtic this week if the MLS franchise reaches an agreement with the reigning Scottish champions. There is also other reading you can do, and I think it actually might be somewhere in this article that Columbus Crew have no gripes with him going to Celtic. They're not going to try and stop the move. They've accepted it. They're open to Wilfried Nancy leaving to join Celtic. It is now just about agreeing that deal in terms of paying out the last year of his contract, which ultimately shouldn't be too much money. We are hearing that Wilfried Nancy is one of the top earners in the MLS, and of course that means we might need to pay something between £1 or £2 million. And I know we like to joke about the low balling and everything like that from Celtic, but especially under these conditions right now, that the pressure they're facing and the potential mess that coming up at this AGM and everything else, they aren't going to lowball. And I would love to sit here and slag them off as I usually do, but I'm realistic, and they've not got. This is going to be done. Wilfried Nancy is going to be Celtic manager, and it's going to happen this week. The negotiations are advanced. There is one more stumbling block, and that's the payout fee. And Celtic aren't going to mess about because they know they aren't in the climate right now to mess about. And if Dermot Desmond wants him that much, which we were hearing over the weekend from reporters in the Daily Record and elsewhere, if he's the number one target and Desmond really wants the guy, he's hardly going to let a couple of million quid get in the way of it. Especially when he's probably going to act with some spite over the next few months to try and shut supporters up and to try and shut Brendan Rodgers up if he inevitably speaks out about the situation on his exit. So that seems to be it. The advanced negotiations are underway. There's only a year left on his contract, according to L'Equipe. This will be pretty well informed, and I think we should expect to hear something over the coming days about the situation, while also acknowledging that I think Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney still will be in the dugout for Sunday. And that's probably one of the more difficult aspects of this whole deal. Even when the contract is signed and the ink is dried on the paper, when does Wilfried Nancy take charge of Celtic? Depending on when that contract is finally signed, there's not an ideal place for him to step in, and I think that's when you've just got to acknowledge, just get him in sooner rather than later. I think Martin O'Neill will probably get the weekend's game, just because the week has started, training has started, and Celtic have released that club statement. But after Saturday, there's really no reason why Celtic shouldn't be getting on with the appointment of Wilfried Nancy. There's really no reason. And I know that it's going to be tough, and I know that he's off to a really hard start with the Coup and with Hibs, but there's no point in waiting around. So we're hearing L'Equipe saying it could be done this week. And I think we could be seeing him managing by next Thursday. I really do. Even on that short week of training, and even under the circumstances of managing a big European game away to a very infamous venue, you've just got to get it done. Now, I think there'll be some people who make the case that if you look through these games, maybe you just let Martin O'Neill take charge to the Cup final, and then bang, fresh start after the Cup final, Wilfried Nancy comes in to start against Dundee United. But I just don't see Celtic operating in that way. I'm not totally against it. I said I'm not going to be a hypocrite, because I said weeks ago on this channel, if Martin O'Neill wants to manage the Cup final, I think he should be allowed to manage the Cup final. He came in and got us through. It would be nice to let him see off his Celtic legacy with one more trophy. But sometimes sentimentality needs to come second. And I don't think the club will act with sentimentality in this instance. I really do think that we'll probably see Wilfried being in for the Feyenoord game. And it's a kind of free hit to start. It gives him the chance to see the weaknesses. It gives him the chance to evaluate things. against really strong opponents, rather than being fooled when, like, you know, if his first game was Dundee at Celtic Park, who have just beat us, by the way, so no offence to Dundee whatsoever, but I think he'll learn a lot more about his players away at home to Feyenoord than he would at home to Dundee. So it's a really strange one. I don't think there's a correct answer to anything. I think I'd just rather him in sooner rather than later, to be quite honest. But yes, St Mirren, Paisley would be tough. De Coupe would be tough. Easter Road would be tough. Then you've got Hearts in a couple of weeks' time. Like, these are all tough areas and places for him to slip in. And ultimately, this is the last thing I'll say in regards to if Martin O'Neill was to stay on, hypothetically, to the League Cup final. It doesn't give off a great look for the new boss to be shadowing Martin O'Neill for 3-4 weeks. Like, I get it, Martin O'Neill's a legend and I respect the hell out of him, but your new permanent manager sitting in the training ground watching Martin O'Neill take charge for the next few weeks, it's very unorthodox. It would certainly be unique, and I think it would ask a lot. I think if things didn't start great for Wilfried, then I think the media would have a field day with that. So, I don't know. Listen, one part of me would love to see Martin O'Neill manage and take the cup final and walk away with one more trophy under his Celtic umbrella. But the other part of me just wants to see the new manager in and for us to get started with things, because ultimately, football's not a waiting game. And the longer that he gets to work with these players before January, the better. He needs to evaluate the squad. He needs to know what he's doing tactically. And we need to get ourselves set up going into what is a thick and fast schedule over the next few months. So, yeah, it looks as though it could happen this week. But we don't have a clear answer on when he'll manage his first game as of right now. So, yeah, Wilfried Nancy is going to become the new Celtic boss. It's basically certain at this point. Of course, I say that with I never like speaking with a absolute 100% certainty. Things can come back to bite you. There is always that chance that a deal collapses at the last minute. We've seen it happen before, and it will certainly happen again in this lifetime. But it looks as though it's about to happen. However, of course, one of the big questions is whether or not Wilfried Nancy would be good enough for the Celtic job. Why are we sounding out a manager from the MLS? Well, it turns out Celtic aren't the only team that's had Wilfried on their wish list, because if we go over to this article that was released this afternoon, apparently he was already sounded out by 3 other French clubs, and there was an article that went on to say, and it was L'Equipe actually, I think it was in that article we showed earlier, that St Etienne, Reims and Rennes had all been looking at Wilfried Nancy, and they'd sounded him out as a potential option, even though talks are at an advanced stage and he's almost certainly going to become Celtic manager. Apparently those 3 teams have been interested in Wilfried Nancy. So, you know, this isn't Celtic just finding some diddy in the middle of nowhere and deciding he's good enough for the Celtic job. No, this is clearly a good coach who has been noticed by teams, big teams, and Celtic are now trying to get in ahead of the race. And that's what I've been trying to say for weeks. Look, by no means is Wilfried Nancy going to be a guaranteed success. By no means. This is a huge risk, and he would never have been my number one option. But I'm getting behind it, I'm excited for it, and I think it's Celtic acting like the modern club they should be. Because this is typically one of these coaches that, you know, I look at, one of the prime examples I look at is Brighton. Brighton have been magnificent in finding coaches from obscure places. The big example being Graham Potter, who hasn't been great in recent years, albeit, but they went to Sweden, to some team that probably no big clubs would ever look at. They hired him. He helped transform the club. Say what you want about Graham Potter recently, but he transformed Brighton and Hove Albion. He made them. He is one of the main reasons they are where they are right now. They also went and done the same with their most recent appointment, and Fabian Hutzler. Not a lot of teams would be looking at the St Pauli boss as a Premier League manager, and yet he's came in. He's done a great job, and there's more and more teams doing that. At the highest level. They're looking for coaches, they're using analytics, they're making the right appointments and getting in ahead of big teams. And then they'll probably go on to manage these big clubs. So these are the things that happen in football. Celtic are getting in ahead of the curve and hopefully sounding out a manager who will be a top coach one day over Europe, and he will have been at Celtic applying his trade. It could go the other way, it could be a flop, but so could any appointment. I've tried to bang the drum of optimism and positivity since the minute he was talked about as the favourite for the Celtic job, and I'm going to continue doing that. I'm looking forward to it. We'll hopefully see him soon. And that's that essentially. Right, so that's that then. Scotland play tonight in a huge game against Denmark. Of course, if we win, we'll be at the World Cup next summer. And that's mad. You know, I after the Euros, I felt really down about Scotland. I was really kind of fed up and tired of Steve Clarke being in charge. I thought the football was terrible. I thought that we'd really peaked at what we could do. And I'm not going to get ahead of myself tonight, because at the weekend against Greece, we were pathetic. We were set up terribly. We went down 3-0 in a game that was, of course, a huge opportunity for us. And it kind of summed up everything I've thought about Scotland under Steve Clarke in these recent years. But if he gets us to a World Cup, you know, he is arguably the greatest manager in the modern history of Scotland. Like, there's not many that come close, especially in my lifetime. It's not even a question. So I'll always respect the hell out of him for getting us to these tournaments. I just hope that we're brave tonight. I hope that we're brave and we approach the game in the way that we should in trying to qualify for a World Cup. Denmark are a great side. A good team. Great players all over the park, and we need to be wary of that, and I'm sure Steve Clarke has drilled that into these players. But we also need to attack the game. We also need to be brave. And if we make it, then class. If we don't, then of course it's not the end of the world. We have a playoff tie and we might get there. I wouldn't be full of much faith of that happening when you see some of the teams you can come up against. But let's do it the easy way. Let's do it tonight, shall we? And let's have a party about it. Let's have the whole country in unison, happy and dreaming about Scotland at the World Cup, rather than half the country caring and half the country no caring, which I'll hold my hands up and say I prescribed to that side of it for a long time recently. But we're back on board, baby. Call me the glory hunter that I am. Right. Feeling patriotic, you can't blame me. Come on. Right, anyway, take care of yourself. I'll see you all next time. And Mona Scotland.